It is the Martha Zoller Show. We're going to bring into the discussion now Scott Sweeney. Scott Sweeney serves on the Board of Education with me, and Nathan Deal says hello. So he was very happy about that, and we welcome you to the program.
Fantastic, Martha, and it's so great to be here, and also with Nathan. He's got his upcoming book signing coming up for Veto, and I'm really excited to be able to go to that. It's going to be great.
So you're coming up here for that, too?
I'm planning on it, yeah.
Yay, that's great, because that's going to be at the Sandra Deal. Well, first, they're going to have a commemoration of Sandra Deal Elementary School at 4:30, and then at about 6 over at the Ramsey Center at Lanier Tech, they're going to do a book signing, which I'm excited about. And I'm going to bring copies for all my grandkids and get them signed by him.
It's a phenomenal extension of the First Lady Sandra Deal's literacy push. And I think it was a pledge that Governor Deal made to Sandra to go ahead and move forward with the book.
So tell folks a little bit about you first before we get into the education stuff.
Sure. Been in Georgia since '96. Came here during the Olympics. My wife's a native of the area, and it was probably...
I knew I liked you for a reason. You were a smart man, marrying a Southern girl.
Best decision I ever made, and we have an amazing family, 2 boys. One's actually in nuclear power school currently for the Navy, and will be graduating next week, so we're really excited about that. And my other son is getting ready to enter his sophomore year of college. We have a beautiful family and have resided in the East Cobb community for a long time, and ended up serving as an elected member of the Cobb County Board of Education there for 8 years. Really did a lot of great work in that community. Very, very thankful for that opportunity. In 2018, unfortunately, I was not reelected to my position, but I was a big supporter of Governor Kemp's. And thankfully, Governor Kemp offered me a role with the State Board of Education, which I joined in 2019. And in 20, I was elected as the chairman. And if you go back to 2019 and then into 20, you'll remember something called the COVID pandemic.
I was sworn in January of 2020, right before the world changed.
So that was a very, very interesting time in education, but not only for Georgia, but across the entire country. But it's been a great ride. We have a fantastic board. I love working with the members that we have, a very cohesive board, and thankfully doing some great work for the state of Georgia.
So we'll talk in the next segment about the kind of controversy we're in right now related to AP African American history. But what do you think is the biggest misconception or misunderstanding about what the role is between local elected authorities, LEAs is what we like to call them, and their boards and our board?
That's a fantastic question and one I get frequently. When I went to the grocery store in Cobb County, my wife always said, you're either going late at night or you're going in disguise. And it's because everybody knows you. And, there's so many questions that you get. And, listen, they're positive questions, but they're very, very concerned about what's happening at the local level, particularly what's happening with their student at their school. Where now on the State Board of Education, I don't have to travel incognito anymore. Nobody knows who you are. It's interesting because you can pick up on conversations and hear about what people's concerns are. And many think that you have certain types of authority and that you don't. And candidly, local board members don't have authority. They only act as a whole. No individual school board member at the local level or even at the state level can say, I will take care of that for you. Okay, and I'm talking about a policy or a procedure or a rule or a student discipline matter. I think those are some of the misconceptions, is thinking that you have the authority to do something.
Scott Sweeney and I will be back just after the bottom of the hour. There's so much more to come, and we're going to be focusing on education for the final part of the program. We'll be back. It is the Martha Zoller Show. That's Governor Ron DeSantis a couple of years ago when he was dealing with AP African American history. And Florida has a different setup where the school system does report to the governor, okay? In Georgia, our school systems have a superintendent, which is a constitutionally elected officer. The state obviously has a role to play in budgeting and all of that kind of stuff, but it's a different constitutional officer. It's a different system. Scott Sweeney is here with me today. And Scott, we have this little thing that blew up a couple of weeks ago about AP African American history. And I'll just tell you where I am on it. I don't mind doing it. But my big problem was the timing, because you can't say a week before school's starting that you're not going to offer a course that people kind of thought you were going to offer. Granted, they never said they were going to offer it, but they assumed, and we're getting a week before school, so that was bad. The communication was poor on it. And I think that in general, I'm not the biggest fan of more AP classes, because even though in my school system, and I think in a lot of your school systems, they pay the fee, the school system pays the fee for the kids, so there is a level playing field. But there's a lot of school systems in our state where they don't pay the fee for the test, and so it's not a level playing field. If you can't pay for the test, you can take the course, but you can't get credit for it. So in general, I'd like a better general education course that everybody takes than an AP. With that said, though, the communication's been bad. We've had multiple rounds of this bad communication, and it looks like now this course is going to go forward.
The course is going to go forward, and the Attorney General weighed in with an unofficial opinion that he actually shared with State Representative Will Wade, one of the sponsors of the bill, and
that's the Divisive Concepts Bill.
And what he shared, and Will Wade, I think, absolutely concurred, was that this Divisive Concepts Bill was never intended to limit AP instruction. There's a specific exemption in the law, specifically for AB courses, so baccalaureate classes, and also for advanced placement classes. Today, there is an existing code for African American Studies, and that is not an AP class, and it's an approved course code. And that course code is approved by the superintendent, and those course codes, I believe, in sometimes, and not necessarily all, as I'm learning, but there's a history of the State Board of Education approving course codes. Now, having said that, this really was poor timing, and I agree with you 100%. There's no way that this decision should have been made this late in the game that affects enrollment for students, that creates a level of uncertainty. And I think at the end of the day, despite what Superintendent Woods was sharing, that students could take an AP class, and if under the original course code, that the biggest concern was whether or not students were going to be awarded advanced grade points, and the potential impact that it might have on Hope Scholarship. Those are huge, huge issues. Now, fortunately, that matter is settled. But as far as the timing and the communication, it was not good at all. And, one other part of this, too, is that this was a unilateral decision that was made by Superintendent Woods. The State Board of Education was not involved in that decision in any way, shape, or form.
So we had several questions that were submitted when I was promoting earlier this week that you were going to be here today. And I saved this one, and actually we got it again this morning, because you've had experience in local school boards as well as on the state board. And this is a question related to meals that are provided in schools, lunch. And the question says, would it be appropriate to discuss K through 12 schools offering free breakfast and lunch to all students via a program called Community Eligibility Provision, CEP? I believe that leads to the indoctrination of students. Every student should pay something. That's from Allen and Rabengat. But we got that question from a number of people, I guess, because school is starting again. I know when I was back in the day, the mom that was volunteering in the school systems where my kids were going, we went through a period of time that in the school system we were in, Gainesville City Schools, that they had reached a certain threshold of Title I students. And so because of that, they went to where all students could get breakfast and lunch provided through Title I think is what it was provided through. But are there different programs for that? And what can you tell us about how they provide meals in schools and who pays for it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll tell you about my experience as a local board member in
See,
Cobb
that's why
County.
I thought you'd be the person to ask.
So in Cobb, and I think this is actually surprises a lot of people. A lot of people think of Cobb as a very, very wealthy, community, and surprisingly, in Cobb County, I think it's 43 to 47%, somewhere in that range, of the students that are enrolled in Cobb County Public Education qualify for free and reduced lunches. Now, the federal government supports this, as you mentioned. It's through Title I programs. And they're income qualifiers, and also based on the number of family persons within a household. So if your income level hits at a certain number and you have a certain number of household members, you potentially qualify for 100% free lunches or meals. I mean, in most instances, I think that includes breakfast as well. If you are at a somewhat higher level of income, and also based on the number of family members, you're qualified for reduced cost lunches. And so those are publicly and they're federally funded programs. Martha, you brought up another program as well, and I don't have a tremendous amount of familiarity with it, but I do believe there are some programs where if an entire district does have above like a certain percentage of students that qualify for free and reduced lunch, then that can be impacted or imparted, rather, throughout the entirety of a county.
Yeah, and it just seems to me, and the question that Alan and others were asking was that, there ought to, I think they're nervous about when you don't pay anything, that you ought to pay something. And school lunches are very inexpensive anyway. You couldn't buy a lunch for what you pay for a school lunch. And that, there ought to be, like, we have this fantastic clinic called the Good News Clinic. And they have a sliding scale kind of thing. It's based on ability to pay, because there is this concept, you should pay something if you can for things. Yeah. So I get the concern. The concern the texter had and the people that asked the question is, if you're giving it free, then do people then expect for their breakfast and lunch to be paid for the rest of their lives?
Yeah, I can't answer the expectation question.
I know.
But at the end of the day, I think well-nourished students will perform better in school. And, I think that's part of what, these programs are trying to accomplish.
Well, and I think the perception is that the only people that are poor are minorities. And the one thing I learned when we moved to North Hall, which was the first time in my entire life that I went to a predominantly white school system. Okay, I grew up in DeKalb County during the what they called the change. You know what I mean? And my school went from 80% white to 20% white over a 5-year period. And throughout that time, I've lived in areas where it's been pretty diverse as far as the population until we moved out to North Hall, and it was. I think it's something like 86% at that time. Now that it's different now. But the thing I learned being a volunteer at school, I had a young man that I was tutoring and reading that was a 5th grade student, that was a white student, and he was poor. I mean, that kid, he had difficulty. He was 5th grade, hadn't learned to read. By the end of the year, we got him reading. And but it taught me a lesson that it's not. Obviously, people of color have their own issues, but there's a lot of poor white kids, too, that need to be treated in the same way.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're absolutely right. And, I'll give you an example, and I'm going to talk about Brumby Elementary School and East Cobb Middle School. Each one of those schools established their own food banks just to support families. And they get a variety of donations from their own community, but they have outreach programs where they're going out to the grocery stores and so forth to be able to go ahead and supplement what they have. During the pandemic, many of the cafeterias at all the schools, because there was no in-person instruction, students that were dependent upon these types of meals, could no longer receive them, unless the districts took extra efforts, and some of them prepared meals and had people drive through lines to pick food up. But
we had school buses delivering meals on school bus routes. Yep.
And first of all, I don't think anybody wants anybody to go hungry. Yet at the same time, what ends up is that children that are receiving these benefits at these schools, or I should say, families that are receiving these benefits, for children, this may be the only meal they get that day, because of some of the poverty that extends, and there's a wide amount of poverty that extends all throughout, our great state of Georgia.
We'll take a break. When we come back, we've got one final segment with Scott Sweeney. We'll be talking about education. We'll be back. It is the Martha Zoller Show. We're here with Scott Sweeney, who is a board member with me on the State Board of Education. And we've got a couple of more issues we want to hit, obviously literacy, but I want to talk about school safety, because we talked with Will Schofield at the first of the week about some of the things he's doing in Hall County to not only have the buildings be secure, but how he's trying to take the temperature down as far as how kids interact with each other and employees and people coming in and out. So tell us a bit about the school safety grants.
Yeah, well, fortunately, these are by school, and, schools are going to be, well, I should say that the funding is at the school level, but at the same time, districts are going to have the authority to manage how those funds will be distributed and implemented. And Georgia's all about local control. So I'm thankful that the governor has put this money into the budget, number one. And then two is that the districts will have the flexibility to develop their own plans. It could be anything from access and entry points within schools. If schools were to go to screeners, for example, for weapons or something like that, if they wanted to do that, they could certainly do so. I don't see a lot of schools going in that direction, thankfully. But there are amazing software programs and quick alert programs that are available that schools will be able to take advantage of if they have not done so already. So this is just really a great supplement to whatever it is they're already doing, but gives them the flexibility to put into place those programs that'll be best for them.
Because Will brought up the good point, and a lot of our superintendents have, where they say, the school shooter, and that's what people worry about the most, but the school shooter is generally somebody we know, is somebody, a student, an employee, somebody affiliated with the school somehow. This idea of somebody coming in off the street randomly is really not something that we should be worried about. Not to say it's never happened, but it's not usually what happens.
That's true. Usually, in those situations, sadly, more often than not, it's somebody within close to the school community. But these programs, are supposed to help, minimize this type of activity. But at the same time, you've got other safety concerns, I think, that the responding officers are concerned about as well. With digital devices today, the instant there is any kind of an incident at a school, the first thing students are doing is getting on their phones and saying, hey, this is happening. And everybody decides to flock to the school. Well, unfortunately, what that can do is it can have an adverse impact. Everybody, wants to get there and, do what's safe for their children. But at the same time, if everybody's flocking to the school, the responding officers can't get there.
Right.
Okay, nor can they get out of there if they need to for, any ambulance or triage treatments or anything like that. So a big part of this is communication within the community to let not only the students know about safety procedures, but families in the community need to understand what those safety procedures are as well.
So Superintendent Will Schofield is listening, and he said to remind people that some of these school dollars can also be spent for mental health training and support, as well as prevention things. And that's kind of the direction he's going in. Well,
that's absolutely right. And in addition to that, there was increased funding for counseling services built into the budget, which is thankful, really, really great. But Mr. Schofield's absolutely correct.
So let's talk a little bit about literacy, because the number one thing we do, I think, is teach kids to read. That's the most important thing that we do because if they can read, they can be successful in school. So we've got new literacy goals and things that are going into place. I think, I'm old enough to remember I've volunteered in schools for a long time, as well as now being on the school board and being involved in other kind of boards that were related to education. You're pro phonics, you go through an anti-phonics, whatever. Literacy gets remade all the time. But the bottom line is we need to teach kids to read.
That's right. Martha, you've sat through presentations that we've had by Woody Peck with Curriculum Associates, who does just a phenomenal job of, sharing information in easily digestible segments. And what he showed, though, was that despite all of the literacy efforts that we have had for an extended period of time, reading scores have not changed all that much. They've operated within a very, very narrow band, despite all of the different types of instruction that have been put forth before children. Collectively, I think most people are now realizing that, phonics are good. And teaching from that element, and that they're following now what's called the science of reading. And Georgia's made a great, great stride to move forward with the implementation of science of reading as far as training for teachers at the individual school level, but importantly also from a screening standpoint for students based on their Lexile scores, based on different performance metrics that they have, and to isolate students that actually are going to need further help with their reading skills. One of the big concerns that I have is that we're going to have literacy coaches that are being funded at that third grade level to help those students that need the help, move forward and get the help that they need. But some of those students will be moving into the fourth grade. And some of them may be at the lower end of the performance metric, and I think they're still going to have a challenge in the fourth grade. So I don't know that it's just coaching at the third grade level that we're going to need. We're going to need coaching at the fourth grade level as well.
Well, and I think it needs to be ongoing. And, I talked about a program I was involved in as a young mother where I was a community literacy coach that came in. They didn't call it that. I was just a volunteer. But I came in and I helped kids that couldn't read. And they used phonics at that time, and that's what I used. And I had 3 or 4 students that over time I coached, because you had to commit to once a week coming in and meeting with that student and helping them. And it was, really great. I mean, it was really great. And I was very excited to be a part of that, because it's what we have to do. We got to all be involved. School should be for everyone.
Well, in Mississippi, they've had an incredible improvement over a long period of time. A lot of people refer to it as the Mississippi Miracle with third grade reading performance. Well, that Mississippi Miracle didn't happen overnight. It was a very deliberate plan that has taken them more than a decade to implement.
So we can't say thank God for Mississippi anymore? I used to say that all the time about Georgia politics as well as Georgia education. Scott Sweeney, thank you so much for being with me today.
Martha, thank you so much for having me.
We'll have him back again, because we got it. Education's not going away. It's more than half the budget, and we need to stay on top of it. It's the Martha Zoller Show. We'll be back tomorrow, because we're always here, always local.